So now I want to get into this resistance point, because even if you mark this time out, even as I do it, and I'm going to do this tomorrow morning,
Great.
and it's going to be my 10:30 to noon block. Well, I might have a podcast, but we'll start it as soon as I can start it.
Sure.
So I'm going to block that out. Even me, who's good, written a book and accomplished a lot and has worked through a lot of this, it still comes at the start when I go to start open. I open that file and it says master your mind, master your life. And I'm like, shit. And I start to get antsy, and I start to fidget around, and I start to think about excuses of why I shouldn't do it. But if I just sit through it and endure it, something else happens. So talk to us about what Stephen Pressfield would call this capital R resistance. What's happening in the brain? What's happening in the body? And what happens when you push through and actually turn that cycle over?
Yeah. So that kind of rumination, or the feeling like I don't know where to start, which is kind of the entry point for half the what used to be bookshelves in the Amazon book department of like how to chunk and how to break things down, and the Pomodoro technique, all of that is trying to manage and cope with the fact that what you're experiencing in that moment is a release of norepinephrine from, it's actually really cool. The name of the neurons in the brainstem, it's a beautiful name, is locus ceruleus. It's actually, the neurons actually look blue.
Sounds like a Roman general.
Yeah, I think it means something. I'm going to get this wrong, but maybe someone will look it up and then correct me in the comments someplace. It's, I think it means blue, and the neurons actually have this dark blue-like thing, I think because of the chemical they make. And it's this wake up signal for the brain. It's like, this is important. Here we go. Like you open that file, and that file it's the symbolism we talked about earlier. That symbol is, this is me. This is my work. This is like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. And I'm just here in my living room and my cats. And there's this huge gap in time and space between where you're at and where you want to be. And the brain recognizes that. It's like if, foraging for food, and there's this huge jungle, and you're like, I think there's a lake on the other side with, food and mates and all this. Like, oh my gosh, how do you do it? Well, the key is just like with the jungle, you just start hacking. The reason is you want to take, not hacking, biohacking, hacking like I meant hacking down plants, or gently moving them aside, whatever is required. But the idea is that release of norepinephrine and adrenaline in the brain and body, it's priming you for action. And if you don't take some action, some physical action, it starts to feel overwhelming and confusing. And so we evolved to do intellectual things and have intellectual pursuits, but this system was designed for physical pursuits, to just start moving away brush and just start going, oh no, that's a wall. That's a bunch of rocks. Okay, this way. Oh wait, there's an opening. That's actually when dopamine is released. So I'll explain, dopamine weaves into this in a healthy way. When you just start some action, so maybe you write out, maybe you're having a really foggy morning in your head, and you just say, I'm just going to write my name 20 times like Bart Simpson, right? Repeat, 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 repeat. That action actually lowers the kind of the threshold, and it bridges this gap with epinephrine. It allows you to get closer to your goal.
Channels that restlessness.
It's taking it someplace.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's interesting. I had a IG Live with Stephen Pressfield yesterday or the day before. And he was talking about a lot of the writers that he know, and he actually adopts this as well. He'll just force himself to start writing. And he knows that he's going to, delete most of this almost 90% of the time. But so the trick that a writer will have, they'll leave themselves. And I think he said Hemingway did this. He would stop in the middle of a sentence. So, cause he knew that like, I know how to finish that sentence. So he leaves himself a clear place, like a clear landing spot.
Oh, I see.
And also stop where he was excited. So you don't run yourself out of ideas and run yourself out of dialogue. It's like, and then he said to the man, don't you stop.
Beautiful.
And then in the next morning, he goes right in there, starting his new cycle, knowing that he's going to face resistance. And he goes, ever do that to me again. And all of a sudden he's started and he's back in his thing.
So I think you actually just solved a long-lasting mystery about a resistance. I mean that in all sincerity. It's like laying down the machete right at the patch of grass or jungle plants that you need to cut down. What that allows you to do, the way that I'm rephrasing what you said, but sure. I want to give, I'm an academic and we give attribution, and I want to give credit where credit's due. Aubrey, I'd never thought about this. By doing that, the story had always been that they leave this thing unanswered so that during the night, their subconscious would work it out. This very beautiful romantic notion. Maybe, okay, fine. But the way you describe it actually makes much more sense in terms of how the neuroscience works, which it means that at the beginning of that next day cycle, let's say 90-minute cycle, you get there, the agitation you feel has a place that
Mhm.
you know is adaptive. You're going to finish this thing. It's like, I'm almost to the end of mowing the lawn, but I'm going to leave
Mhm.
this patch of grass. So the next morning, instead of feeling the agitation of what to do next because you mowed the whole lawn and you now have to, plant tomatoes, you are saying, I'm just going to finish chopping down the hedges. I'm going to mow the lawn. I'm
Yeah.
going to finish this sentence. And the completion of a motor task, of some physical task, takes advantage of this system where as we release that norepinephrine and we complete something, we get a little pulse of dopamine. And most people don't know this. There's no reason why they should. But dopamine, which is made from L-dopa, L-tyrosine from food, becomes L-dopa eventually, becomes dopamine. But dopamine is actually what epinephrine and adrenaline are made from. When you make dopamine, you can go longer, harder, and with more intensity. I guess that's harder. Longer and with more intensity and more focus than you could if you didn't get that dopamine hit. So starting work from the standpoint of a brick wall is very hard.
Mm.
So what you're saying is, and I love this because it means leave it a little bit unfinished so the next day you can channel that agitation into something meaningful, pick up the dopamine hit, and then churn into that day's work. And so I want to thank you because a lot of what I do these days is try and take what we know for sure about biology and apply it to real world scenarios. And it doesn't always work. And there has always been this thing about leaving this thing unfinished, the ellipse, the ... But I think in a really practical way, the way you describe it makes really good sense. And I'm going to start to adopt that practice.